So, Mufti Faraz, I've got two questions which are similar to. I'll raise one question. EQRAZ, as you know, is taking financing from a non-Sharia compliant entity on a Sharia compliant basis. And that is basically a Wakala structure. So I would like you to briefly tell us how the Wakala structure works. And while they are taking money on a Sharia compliant basis from a non-Sharia compliant entity, are they still Sharia compliant, and how are they maintaining that Sharia compliance? Thank you.
It's a very good question. Just because there's a label of non-compliant on certain financial institutions, it doesn't mean that all the funds that the financial institution has is not Sharia compliant. That's the first thing. Many banks hold deposits, right? Current accounts, demand deposits, which are simply just loans. And for the most part, the depositors' funds in the bank are halal, but it's just the interest that's being paid on top of that. That's where the riba comes. So one can argue that it may be that majority of the funds held in a conventional bank, they themselves are not unlawful because they've just been deposited by customers. But it's the contracts of the conventional bank, the interest that they're paying, that's where the unlawful amount is. And the financing on the asset side, that's where the problem is. So when it comes to EQRAZ receiving a credit line and in having financing from a conventional firm, the key thing to keep in mind is the contract between EQRAZ and the conventional firm. That must be Sharia compliant. If that is not Sharia compliant, then EQRAZ cannot receive funding from a non-compliant or a conventional entity. It's just as simple as you going to your local store, right, in Canada, which happens to be a store not owned by Muslims, and you buying something from them. What will we say? We will say that as long as what you're buying is halal and the transaction is done in a halal way, you can buy from them. Just because they're supplying you with an item, it doesn't mean that because they're not Muslim and they may have interest-bearing debt on their property, that doesn't impact your transaction. It's your transaction is looked at the core components of your engagement with that person. So from here, we learn that it's all about the contract between EQRAZ and the conventional financial provider. That must be Sharia compliant. Even in IOFI standards, for example, if you open Sharia Standard 24, which is based on syndicate financing, very clearly it's mentioned in there that a conventional financial firm may enter into a syndication and a syndicate financing where they provide financing to an entity as long as the contract is Sharia compliant. So even in IOFI that's been mentioned and it's practiced. So we always make sure, and that's good, because what we're doing is making sure that these conventional firms, they are doing things in a Sharia compliant way when it comes into a contract. And as they engage more, perhaps they see the beauty of Sharia. Perhaps they see the beauty of Islamic finance, and perhaps they increase their portfolio, and perhaps they can convert the entire financial operation into a Sharia operation when they really engage with the benefits.
Thank you very much, Mufti Sahab. This is a very good example. If you can just also highlight on Wakala structure, how it works between conventional and Islamic in terms of
so how it works is the conventional entity and firm will be the principal. They'll have an agreement with EQRAZ and they'll highlight and have all the, like a term sheet, which highlights the core operations that EQRAZ must do as part of this Wakala. And so a Wakala is agency. That's what Wakala means for everyone's benefit. So EQRAZ becomes the agent on behalf of this firm to invest the funds in a Sharia compliant way. So not only is the agency contract Sharia compliant, but what EQRAZ does with the funds has to also be Sharia compliant. So EQRAZ has this agency agreement, and they take the funds from this conventional entity to finance and fund the tawarruk transactions. That's what's happening.
Jazakumullah khair.